Hello. I'm going to walk away from the podium, make sure my mic is working. It's working? Okay, awesome. All right. Do you think crazy is a bad word? I mean, we live in a hyper-politically correct climate, and words carry weight. So it makes sense if you do. I certainly did. I used to fear the word crazy falling from my mouth the same way I would fear dropping a hard F-bomb in front of a classroom full of kids. I used to fear being called it, but more so, I would fear being labeled it for life. So you might ask, then why did you name the title of your life's work, Crazy is My Superpower? You might ask, weren't you worried that people would find that offensive? To which I would tell you, I was kind of counting on it. I was counting on proving people wrong. Because even though crazy used to be a painful label for me, it is now my greatest source of pride. But to truly understand why I chose to co-opt the word crazy, you have to understand my story. So let me take you back to New Jersey in the 90s, which I know sounds kind of terrifying. Just bear with me. My parents, my brother and sister, a 100-pound pit bull, and the greatest mistake my parents ever made, me, traveled around New Jersey all over like gypsies. It wasn't a romantic kind of thing. We were just really poor. And we lived paycheck to paycheck. My dad was a self-taught mechanic. My mom was a home health aide. And though those are skilled and grueling jobs, they don't exactly pay the bills. So we were evicted a lot. We lived on friends' porches, in their garages. And then eventually we just lived in our car. And I'll never forget how it felt to sleep in that car and open my eyes every couple of hours throughout the night and notice that my dad had parked the car in a different block, so strangers wouldn't see his family sleeping inside. But that taught me a valuable lesson. That taught me how to pretend. I learned that when I went to school, I could just pretend that I wasn't hungry at lunch. I could pretend I was sick so people wouldn't know that I just couldn't afford food. I would pretend that I was a loner so people wouldn't try to come over to my house after school and realize my house was a car. I pretended I wore the same thing every single day because I just didn't care about fashion like every other lemming, when really shopping was just a luxury we could not afford. I walked around with this forced, I don't give a crap attitude like it was my preteen power pose. And you know what? It worked. Before I knew it, I actually didn't give a crap. I had somehow, accidentally, tricked myself into not caring what people thought about me. Tricked myself into gaining self-confidence by pretending. It was a revelatory experience. I didn't have to let people make me feel less than. I could take an oncoming attack on a profound insecurity and twist it into protective armor. And every day I would make that choice again. I would pretend. Eventually, we would move into a 300-square-foot motel room. And I would have to pretend I wasn't sharing a mattress with my mother and my sister and a 100-pound pit bull. I would pretend that I went to bed with my stomach full. I would pretend that I wasn't slowly starting to unravel. I needed to find a way to make that situation work for me, to escape from my oppressive reality, and I thought this would be maybe an opportunity for my imagination. So I took a notebook, and I scribbled in this little $1 CVS spiral notebook for weeks on end, until I had my very first comic book, starring me. Little superhero AJ would fight crime and travel the world and had tons of friends, all things I was definitely not doing in real life. not only did that help me feel focused, it helped me feel useful. And from there, my love for the world of make-believes just evolved. Eventually, I found video games. And in video games, I could live through a hero's eyes. I could see the world. I could defeat zombies or super soldiers or prevent the apocalypse. I could feel strong. I would live as these strong female characters, and I would feel confident and pretty and loved and capable of fighting off the darkness that was surrounding me. But soon, before I even got my first period, I would have my first panic attack. I didn't understand what was happening to me. I woke up in the middle of the night. I was shaking, I was sobbing, I was terrified. My mother, who was sleeping right next to me, woke up and she opened her groggy eyes and she looked over at me and she asked, "What the hell is your problem?" And I didn't know what to say. I couldn't find words. And so I just sobbed and laid there. And she shuffled over to me and she started stroking my hair and she said, some of the most helpful advice I had ever heard. She said, "Stop acting crazy." So I kept pretending. I pretended I was okay, and I went back to sleep. In the months that would follow, I pretended I didn't feel a dark cloud growing over my head, pretended I didn't wake up covered in this invisible weight. I didn't want anyone to think I was crazy. I didn't want anyone to think I wasn't strong enough to be sane. I was an insomniac. I had constant panic attacks. I would sometimes shower 3 times a day so no one would see me cry. I was already labeled so many embarrassing things. People thought I was the trashy poor kid. They thought I was the ugly duckling. They thought I was nerdy, scrawny. I didn't want them to think I was crazy. And so I used my love of these fantastical worlds to hide, to protect me. They were my protective armor. So much so that at the age of 17, I gained such a knack for living in creating my own worlds that I would apply to film school. And I made it into NYU's Tisch School of the Arts, focusing on film and television writing. This was not only an opportunity for me to follow my passion, it was a way for me to write my own happy ending. But do you know what's really common in video games and comic books and television? Shocking twists. 6 months into my first year at NYU, my mother would end up in a psychiatric hospital. After hiding her own depressive symptoms for years, she would eventually learn the hard way that she was living with undiagnosed and untreated bipolar disorder. Hearing her diagnosis, something inside of me began to yell out. But I chose to ignore it and stay in the world of make-believe. I silenced this gut instinct as I came home every weekend to take care of my mother. I silenced this pleading voice as I continued to cry every day for no reason. As I locked myself in my dorm room, afraid to make eye contact with other humans. I silenced my pounding heart as I began to unravel. Overwhelmed by tuition I couldn't afford and a life I couldn't control, I would end up leaving school. I would end up back in the uncertainty of poverty. And then one day, I woke up in the hospital too. At the age of 19, I had overdosed. In a haze of overwhelming pain and confusion, I had taken an almost lethal amount of pills. I had tried and failed to take my own life. Lying in a hospital bed with thick black track marks running down my arms from all the IVs poking and prodding my veins, that was the lowest point of my life. But I survived. And in surviving, I was forced to make a choice. Would I go on pretending, or would I face my truth? Hitting rock bottom is what truly set me free. It helped me find answers. I was soon diagnosed with bipolar disorder. My lifelong dark cloud was given a name, an identity. It was no longer ominous and confusing. It was real, and I could fight it. I got treatment, I went to therapy, and for the first time in years, I found peace. And perhaps the most vital discovery in this process was figuring out that my excitable moods, my tender heart, my comfort in the fantastical, though attributes of my disorder, could be used as my greatest weapons. Eventually, thanks to my comfort in that fantastical, I would decide to use those weapons to become my very own real-life superhero. I would put on some spandex and I would start fighting bad guys. I wasn't some Batman vigilante, even though that would have been awesome. But I did go to pro wrestling school, which, yes, is a real thing. I would channel my aggression and my energy into beating up boys in the ring. I had access to a million emotions, which would come in handy in the larger-than-life Broadway play-like performance of a wrestling show. I would eventually audition for the biggest company in the world, and I would get hired to travel the globe with their circus of performers. But even within the circus, I was somehow still the weirdo. I still had negative labels thrown at me. I was still too ugly to compete with the models. I was too scrawny to be intimidating. My clothes were too cheap to be impressive, too average to be sexy. And what was I supposed to do with all this shameful crazy? The answer to all of it was to let my freak flag fly. Our television audience connected to my average clothes because they wore them too. People liked my loud mouth and my stubborn attitude because they desired the freedom to be brazen. Our female audience connected to me because they didn't feel they were strong enough or pretty enough either. And seeing all 5'2", 100 pounds of me beat people up, compete as the underdog, and win, they could believe in the impossible. And seeing how that audience embraced me, not in spite of, but because of my differences, that inspired me to bring my own brand of crazy to the screen. I magnified my emotions that came from a very real place, and I twisted them into fiction. My character would eventually be nicknamed the Crazy Chick. And suddenly, these feelings I was ashamed of were now being acted out in front of thousands of people in an arena, in front of millions of people on international television. After almost a decade in wrestling, I decided to retire. The Crazy Chick had already made her way into comic books and video games, action figures. That was the cool one. And she won championships, so it was time for her to maybe stop living in the world of make-believe. I decided to get back in touch with my love of writing, except this time, I would not be creating a work of fiction. This time, I would tell my own story, mistakes and all. I would expose my blood and bone, and I would tell the world about living with bipolar disorder. And even though I was terrified that I would be rejected, Crazy is My Superpower became a New York Times bestseller. And the funniest part, even though I didn't get to graduate film school, my book is now being developed into a TV show, and I'm going to write it. Kind of took the winding path there, but I got where I needed to go. When I was diagnosed, I believed my illness would be my great lifelong weakness, my fatal flaw. But the interesting thing about flaws is that they really are in the eye of the beholder. Weakness can turn into strength with just a simple shift of perspective. You get to choose. One day, I made the choice to stop pretending, to stand up and fight. I would embrace what the world taught me to shun. What was once my shameful secret became my secret weapon. My diagnosis didn't have to be an affliction. It could simply be the gift of extraordinary emotions. My bipolar disorder has given me superhuman empathy, a passion-fueled soul, an overachieving mind, and a loud-ass voice. It has given me the gift of a lofty imagination, an iron will, and an unbreakable belief in the impossible. I've used my gifts to go from being homeless to being an athlete, an author, and now an advocate. My bipolar disorder made me a woman with a mission. It is now my mission to show the world that crazy simply means being able to see the world in more vibrant, more beautiful colors. And getting therapy and treatment teaches you how to paint with those colors. It is now my mission to help anyone who is living through their own mental health battle know you are not alone, you are not broken. You do not need to wait for a hero to rescue you. You can become your own. Even if your personal battle is a different one, my message to you is the same. Embrace your crazy, your imperfection, your weakness, whatever it may be, because it is the most special thing about you. I am no longer afraid to be called crazy. Crazy is my superpower. What will yours be?